Welcome back to the Ghastly Journal, where we uncover the darkest stories hidden in the shadows. Today we journey to the humid bayous of Louisiana, where the year 1923 marked not a celebration, but rather the culmination of a generational mystery that continues to haunt the misty waterways to this day. The Beaumont estate stood like a decaying monument to faded southern glory, its once white columns now mottled with moss and memory. Nestled deep within the cypress groves where sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns that resembled skeletal fingers, the mansion had witnessed the passing of generations since before the war between the states. Spanish moss draped from ancient oak branches like funeral shrouds, swaying gently in the tepid breeze that never quite relieved the oppressive Louisiana heat. The locals of St. Martin Parish spoke of the Beaumont men in hushed tones, their voices dropping to whispers when conversations turned to the family's peculiar matrimonial history. 14 brides had crossed the threshold of that grand house since the turn of the century, each one young and vibrant, each one vanished like morning dew under a merciless sun. The parish records tell a curious tale. Between 1897 and 1923, the Beaumont patriarchs, father, sons, and cousins, had collectively wed 14 women. The weddings were lavish affairs, with the cream of Louisiana society in attendance. Champagne flowed like the Mississippi, music drifted through the gardens, and the brides, adorned in white lace and family heirlooms, smiled with the promise of prosperous futures as members of one of Louisiana's oldest families. Yet within weeks, sometimes mere days, each bride would seemingly evaporate from existence. The Beaumont men would appear in town alone, offering vague explanations of wives gone to visit relatives, or departed due to homesickness, or taken ill and sent to recuperate in more favorable climates. Letters purportedly from these absent wives occasionally arrived, but no one ever reported seeing them again. The murky waters of the bayou keep secrets well. Beneath their placid surface, ancient alligators glide like living fossils, primordial guardians of whatever truths might lie beneath the silt and tangled roots. Did these waters become the final resting place for those 14 women? Did they bear silent witness to midnight processions, weighted bundles, and the splash of eternal silence? By 1923, when Evangeline Thibault became the 14th bride to disappear, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The local sheriff, a man whose family had long been beholden to Beaumont patronage, finally succumbed to mounting pressure from neighboring parishes and federal authorities. On a sweltering August morning, a delegation of lawmen approached the estate, their boots leaving imprints in the dew-damp earth as they came to inquire about the whereabouts of 14 missing women. What they discovered in the east wing of the mansion, a wing that had ostensibly been closed for renovations since before the first bride disappeared, would become the stuff of Louisiana legend. The honeysuckle-scented air of the estate grounds belied the horrors that waited within those walls, horrors that would shake the foundations of Southern society and raise questions about what dark compulsions might lurk behind the veneer of gentility and old money. The Beaumont men had long been fixtures in St. Martin Parish society, their lineage traceable to the earliest French settlers who had carved civilization from the primeval swamp. Their fortune, whispered some, came not merely from sugar and cotton, but from darker commerce conducted in the shadowy years when Jean Lafitte and his brigands ruled these waters. The family crest, a raven clutching a golden ring, adorned their gates, carriages, and the heavy signet rings each Beaumont man wore upon coming of age. Sheriff Thibodeau's men moved with trepidation through the mansion's grand foyer, their boots echoing against marble floors imported from Italy in more prosperous times. The chandelier above cast fractured light through crystals that had not been dusted in years, creating a constellation of dim stars across the entrance hall's vaulted ceiling. A servant, one of the few remaining in the household, guided them with trembling hands toward the east wing, her eyes never meeting theirs as she unlocked a door that groaned on hinges thick with rust. The air that escaped when the door swung open carried the cloying sweetness of decay, poorly masked by chemical preservatives. Pine oil and formaldehyde, scents familiar to any undertaker, mingled with something far more troubling, the lingering traces of perfume, 14 distinct fragrances that hung in the stagnant air like ghosts. What the lawmen discovered defied rational explanation by the standards of 1923. Each room in the abandoned wing had been transformed into a tableau of domestic tranquility, frozen in time. 14 parlors, each decorated to the taste of a different era, from the Empire furnishings favored in 1897 to the Art Nouveau stylings popular at the time of Evangeline's disappearance. And in each room, seated in perfect posture upon settees and wing-back chairs, were the missing brides. Not as corpses. That would have been a mercy. The Beaumont men, it seemed, had practiced a perverse art passed down through generations. Each bride had been subjected to a process that preserved not merely flesh, but the illusion of life itself. Their skin maintained an alabaster luminescence. Their hair was arranged in the fashions of their day, and their eyes, replaced with blown glass of matching hues, stared with eternal patience toward doors that would never again admit their husbands. Most disturbing were the journals discovered in a writing desk in the master bedroom. Handwritten in the precise calligraphy of Thaddeus Beaumont, the family patriarch, they detailed the ancient technique learned from a Haitian practitioner of forgotten arts during the tumultuous years following the Haitian Revolution. The journal spoke of a belief that women's beauty was ephemeral, but through their method such beauty could be preserved beyond the ravages of time, childbearing, and the inevitable decay of matrimonial affection. The last entry, dated merely 3 weeks prior, described how Evangeline had joined the constellation of eternal brides after displaying the first troubling signs of willfulness, which Thaddeus had determined would eventually lead to the dissolution of her perfect beauty through the corruption of discontent. The discovery at the Beaumont estate sent ripples of horror through Louisiana society, transforming whispered rumors into headlines that screamed across the nation. "House of Horrors in the Bayou," proclaimed the New Orleans Picayune, while the New York Times more sedately reported, "Southern Family's Macabre Collection Unveiled." Dr. Eleanor Rousseau arrived from Tulane University 3 days after the initial discovery. A slender woman with prematurely silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. She moved through the mansion with clinical precision, her notebook filling with observations written in a cramped, elegant hand. As one of the few female pathologists in the South, she had fought for her position through years of academic skepticism and professional disdain. "The process appears to be a sophisticated amalgamation of embalming techniques and certain chemical treatments I've not encountered in medical literature," she explained to District Attorney Harrison Wells, a corpulent man whose perpetually damp handkerchief worked constantly against his brow in the Louisiana heat. "The preservation is remarkable, almost as if they've been transformed into some form of human statuary." Wells nodded, his jowls quivering with each movement. "But they are dead, Doctor? There can be no question of that?" Dr. Rousseau's dark eyes flashed with momentary irritation. "They have been dead for years, Mr. Wells. What we're seeing is the result of a perverse dedication to the craft of preservation and display." The servants' quarters revealed another layer to the nightmare. Beneath floorboards in the cabin of Odette Laveau, the household's aging cook, investigators discovered a cache of small cloth dolls, each bearing a lock of hair that matched the 14 brides. Odette herself had vanished the night of the raid, but locals spoke of her connections to practitioners of root work and conjure magic in the backwater parishes. "My grandmother always said Miss Odette wasn't just cooking food in that kitchen," whispered Cécile Préjean, who had delivered milk to the estate for 27 years. Her weathered face creased further as she leaned toward the young reporter from the Lafayette Gazette. She was brewing compliance. Them girls never stood a chance once they drank her special wedding night tisanes. The Beaumont men themselves presented a unified front of aristocratic indignation when finally apprehended at their hunting lodge 10 miles from the main estate. Thaddeus, the patriarch at 73, retained the ramrod posture of his Confederate cavalry days, his white beard immaculately trimmed and his eyes the pale blue of winter sky, cold, distant, and devoid of remorse. "You mistake preservation for destruction," he informed Judge Comeau during the preliminary hearing, his voice carrying the cultured tones of European education. "We have honored these women as no others have been honored. While your wives wither into crones, ours remain eternally as they were on their most perfect day." His son Gerard, a man of 40 with the same aquiline nose and high forehead that marked the Beaumont lineage, nodded in solemn agreement. "We loved them too dearly to witness their decline," he added, adjusting the signet ring that gleamed on his manicured hand. "What we did was born of devotion, not malice." The third-generation representative, young Lucian, barely 25 and already widowed twice according to parish records, maintained the detached serenity of the truly delusional. "They are our living portraits," he said, "more enduring than canvas, more faithful than memory." The Beaumont trial transcripts remain sealed in the Louisiana State Archives, accessible only by special petition to this day, a testament to their disturbing nature. What filtered into public knowledge came through the testimony of those peripheral to the case. The parish doctor who had signed 14 seemingly routine death certificates over the years, each attributing a bride's demise to consumption, brain fever, or women's hysteria. The local dressmaker who had been commissioned to create new gowns for women long deceased. The groundskeeper who spoke of midnight ceremonies in the garden gazebo, where Thaddeus would renew his vows to wives already transformed into his eternal collection. Among the evidence presented during closed proceedings was a leather-bound volume discovered beneath a loose floorboard in Thaddeus's private study. Its pages, yellow with age and inscribed with a spidery hand, detailed a ritual more ancient than the Beaumont lineage itself. Anthropologists consulted by the prosecution traced its origins to certain Dahomean practices brought to Louisiana through the slave trade, then perverted through generations of misinterpretation and dark purpose. The ritual required not merely the preservation of flesh, but the capture of what the Beaumonts called the essential feminine essence. Small crystalline vials were found embedded in the chest cavity of each preserved bride, containing a viscous amber fluid that, when analyzed using the limited scientific methods of 1923, revealed compounds derived from the endocrine glands of the women themselves. They believed they were distilling the very essence of feminine beauty and virtue, Dr. Rousseau explained in a sealed affidavit. These extracts were then consumed by the Beaumont men in the belief that they would absorb these qualities and achieve a perverted form of immortality. The revelation explained the remarkable youthfulness of Thaddeus, who at 73 possessed the vigor and appearance of a man 20 years younger. Photographs from the 1880s showed him virtually unchanged, save for the whitening of his once auburn hair. Perhaps most unsettling were the nursery rooms discovered in the attic of the East Wing, 14 in total, each prepared with meticulous care for children who were never born. Inside lacquered music boxes in each nursery, investigators discovered small, desiccated organs carefully preserved in silk-lined compartments. Dr. Rousseau's clinical notes identified these as reproductive organs, harvested from each bride before the preservation process began. The Beaumonts believed that future generations could be cultivated outside the womb, her notes stated, through a process they termed quintessential germination. They sought to create heirs without subjecting their brides to the disfigurement of pregnancy and childbirth. The bayou itself eventually yielded further secrets when drought lowered the water levels in the summer of 1924. In the stagnant pools near the estate's boundaries, glass containers emerged from the mud, each holding embryonic remains suspended in a solution that had preserved them in their developmental stasis for years. Local fishermen who made the discovery spoke of the perfect, tiny faces that seemed to watch them through the murky liquid, some with features recognizably Beaumont, others bearing the delicate aspects of the vanished brides. The trial of the Beaumont men concluded in the stifling summer of 1924 with a verdict that surprised no one, yet satisfied few. All 3 generations were sentenced to death by hanging, though as court officers moved to escort them from the courtroom, Thaddeus Beaumont smiled with the serene confidence of a man privy to secrets beyond ordinary comprehension. "We are merely custodians of a tradition older than your laws," he announced to the packed gallery. "Cut down the gardeners if you must, but the garden shall continue to bloom." His cryptic statement gained ominous significance when, 3 days before their scheduled execution, the Beaumont men were found in their cells at Angola Prison, seated in perfect posture, their skin bearing the same alabaster luminescence as their brides. No signs of poison were detected, no means of self-preservation evident. The prison physician, Dr. Morris Gladwell, noted in his report that rigor mortis appeared to be indefinitely suspended, and that, A faint scent of honeysuckle and formaldehyde emanates from the corpses, which maintain a temperature approximately 2 degrees below what medical science would consider normal for a living person. The mystery deepened when authorities returned to the Beaumont estate to conduct further investigations, only to find the mansion consumed by fire. By the time fire brigades arrived from 3 parishes, the structure had collapsed into its foundations, taking with it the physical evidence of generations of macabre obsession. Most significantly, the 14 preserved brides had vanished entirely. Among the charred ruins, a single artifact remained curiously untouched: a leather portfolio containing the architectural plans for a structure identical to the destroyed mansion, dated 1842, 1896, and 1925. The final date, still 1 year in the future at the time of discovery, bore a notation in fresh ink: "The Phoenix resumes its flight." The New Orleans Archdiocesan Archives yielded an unexpected connection when researcher Marielle Devereaux discovered a collection of correspondence between Thaddeus Beaumont's great-grandfather, Julien Beaumont, and a Dominican priest excommunicated in 1836. The letters, written in archaic French, referenced le procédé de l'épouse éternelle, the process of the eternal bride, and mentioned similar family compounds in Virginia, Cornwall, and the French Alps. One letter, dated February 3, 1838, contained a passage that parish archivist Father Benoit deemed significant enough to bring to authorities. "The women are merely vessels, mon ami. What we preserve is not their beauty, but their essence, the distillation of feminine purity that, when properly harvested and consumed, extends our natural lives by decades." My own father, now approaching his 140th year, appears no more than 60, though he keeps to the east wing and is seen only by family. The procedure requires 14 vessels for maximum efficacy, corresponding to the 14 phases of the lunar cycle, under which the final tincture must be prepared. We have identified suitable families in New Orleans whose daughters possess the requisite qualities. Most disturbing was the discovery made by Dr. Eleanor Rousseau as she expanded her investigation to other prominent Louisiana families. Parish records revealed that 7 other families across the state had similar patterns of matrimonial disappearances, though none as extensive as the Beaumonts. In each case, the family name had died out by 1924, or appeared to have done so. "The question that haunts me," Dr. Rousseau wrote in her private journal, "is not whether the Beaumont legacy continues, but where and in what form. For traditions, this ancient and depraved do not simply vanish, they adapt." The exhumation of the Beaumont family crypt took place on a moonless night in October of 1925, precisely 1 year after the inexplicable fire. A consortium of university researchers, led by the indefatigable Dr. Rousseau, had petitioned for months to examine the ancestral remains, suspecting that the pattern of preservation might extend beyond the 14 brides. As workmen levered open the granite slab that sealed the underground chamber, a peculiar luminescence, described by witnesses as a phosphorescence reminiscent of certain deep-sea creatures, emanated from within. The crypt itself defied conventional burial architecture. Rather than the expected arrangement of individual sarcophagi, the chamber spiraled downward in concentric rings, each level containing 7 niches cut into the living stone. At the center stood a stone table, its surface concave and channeled with intricate grooves that converged at a central basin. The grooves retained traces of a crystallized substance that, when analyzed, proved identical to the amber fluid found in the vials embedded in the 14 brides. "This is not a tomb," Dr. Rousseau whispered, her breath creating ephemeral ghosts in the chill air. "It's a distillery." Most remarkable was the discovery that none of the niches contained complete remains. Each held precisely arranged partial skeletons, a collection of left femurs in one, vertebrae in another, skulls in a third, all bearing evidence of the same preservation techniques observed in the brides. Parish records indicated 47 Beaumont men had been interred over the previous century, yet the remains suggested a number far smaller. Among Dr. Rousseau's papers, sealed until 1973, was a daguerreotype discovered beneath the stone table. The image, though damaged by time and the elements, showed 7 men seated around a dining table, raising crystal glasses filled with amber liquid. Their faces were blurred, whether by photographic limitation or deliberate obfuscation remains debated, but each wore the distinctive Beaumont signet ring. The photograph was dated 1872, yet one figure bears striking resemblance to Thaddeus Beaumont as he appeared in 1923. The investigation took an unexpected turn when authorities received reports of 14 nearly identical young women arriving in parishes throughout Louisiana, each claiming to be distant relations of established families. These women, described as possessing a curious uniformity of grace and an alabaster complexion, all secured positions as governesses or companions to wealthy widowers. By the spring of 1926, 7 of these men had remarried, their brides bearing uncanny resemblances to daguerreotypes of the original Beaumont wives. Dr. Rousseau's final contribution to the case came in the form of translated passages from the Dominican priests' journals, recovered from the Vatican secret archives through ecclesiastical connections. The text, written in a cipher that combined elements of Aramaic and medieval French, detailed a process whereby consciousness could be transferred through the consumption of properly prepared essences. "They do not merely preserve beauty," she wrote in her last entry before her unexplained disappearance in June of 1926. "They have found a way to transfer the self from vessel to vessel, maintaining continuity across generations. The Beaumont men did not die in those prison cells. They transformed. The question now becomes, into whom?" The aftermath of the Beaumont affair cast a long shadow across Louisiana, though official records of the investigation gradually disappeared from public archives. In 1929, when Dr. Eleanor Rousseau's colleague Dr. Martin Halpern attempted to access her research files, he discovered that all documentation had been reclassified under the obscure Historical Anomalies Containment Act, legislation quietly passed by the state legislature in December 1926. Halpern, refusing to abandon his colleague's work, conducted private interviews with residents of St. Martin Parish. His handwritten notes, discovered in 1978 sealed within the walls of his French Quarter apartment, revealed a pattern more disturbing than the official narrative. "The locals speak of a peculiar migration," he wrote in smudged pencil. Following the trial, 7 families of considerable wealth throughout Louisiana experienced what one might call a renewal. Aging patriarchs seemed suddenly invigorated, their business acumen sharper than remembered. These same men developed newfound interests in certain scientific pursuits: taxidermy, chemistry, preservation techniques. Each acquired property with extensive underground spaces, ostensibly for wine cellars or food storage appropriate to their station. A partial letter recovered from Halpern's effects, addressed to the Department of Public Health but apparently never sent, contains a troubling observation. The women who married into these 7 families since 1926 display a uniformity of bearing that defies coincidence. Though supposedly unrelated, they share certain mannerisms, a distinctive way of tilting the head when listening, a particular method of folding hands at rest, identical posture when seated. Most telling is their collective avoidance of mirrors, a behavior noted by household staff across all 7 estates. The historical record reveals another curiosity. Between 1926 and 1932, 7 prominent Louisiana physicians specializing in women's medicine or chemistry vanished without explanation. Each disappearance was preceded by the delivery of a small parcel containing a raven's feather and a gold ring. Items dismissed by authorities as unrelated pranks, but unmistakably reminiscent of the Beaumont family crest. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery made during the renovation of the old St. Martin Parish Courthouse in 1954. Workers removing paneling in what had been Judge Comeau's chambers found a sealed letter addressed to the state governor, written in the judge's hand but never sent. Its yellowed pages contained a confession. "I have failed in my sworn duty. The trial was a charade, the evidence carefully curated. What we discovered in that house extended beyond the Beaumont family into the highest circles of our society." Names appear in Thaddeus Beaumont's private papers that, were they made public, would collapse the very foundations of our state's governance. I have been assured that the 14 shall receive proper Christian burial, but I know this is another falsehood among many. The Beaumonts are not ended. They have merely shed one identity for others, like serpents casting off unwanted skin. Accompanying the letter was a small vial of amber fluid and a notation in a different hand. One drop ensures compliance. The judge performed his role admirably. The legend of the Beaumonts persisted in hushed conversations through the decades, but by the mid-1960s, it had largely faded into the realm of regional folklore. That changed during the historic drought of 1967, when the waters of Bayou Teche receded to levels unprecedented in living memory, exposing long-submerged secrets embedded in the silt. A group of biology students collecting specimens along the newly exposed banks discovered a series of glass spheres, each roughly the size of a grapefruit, arranged in a perfect circle. The outer casings had developed a patina of mineral deposits, but the contents remained visible through the clouded glass. Human hearts, suspended in amber fluid, each still exhibiting what the university laboratory would later describe as anomalous cellular integrity, inconsistent with expected decomposition. Most remarkable was the faint yet perceptible rhythmic movement observed when the spheres were placed in proximity to one another. 14 subtle pulses, perfectly synchronized despite their separation for over 40 years. "They beat as one," wrote Professor Eliza Montgomery in her heavily redacted field notes. When arranged in their original circular configuration, a phenomenon occurs that defies scientific explanation. A harmonic resonance that induces profound psychological effects on female observers. 3 of my students reported experiencing what they described as memories that aren't mine, detailed visions of wedding ceremonies in a mansion none had ever visited. The spheres disappeared from university storage 3 days after their discovery. Campus security footage showed nothing but a momentary power fluctuation and an inexplicable bloom of what appeared to be morning fog seeping beneath the laboratory door, despite the summer heat. That same week, 7 young women enrolled as transfer students in various Louisiana universities, each pursuing advanced degrees in biochemistry or medical preservation techniques. Their academic records indicated previous study at institutions that, when contacted by suspicious administrators, claimed no knowledge of these students, despite the authenticated documentation they had provided. State newspaper archives from 1967 reveal another curious pattern. 7 prominent Louisiana families announced plans to restore historic properties that had fallen into disrepair. Each property featured extensive underground structures initially designed as Civil War-era shelters. Architectural reviews noted the unusual nature of the restorations, which focused primarily on subterranean chambers equipped with advanced ventilation systems and specialized electrical wiring unsuited to conventional habitation. A research assistant working with Professor Montgomery noted the geographical relationship between these 7 properties. When plotted on a map, they formed a constellation identical to the arrangement of stars in the Corona Borealis, the northern crown. At the center of this terrestrial constellation lay the vacant land where the Beaumont estate once stood, now overgrown with unusually vibrant vegetation that locals refused to harvest or clear, despite its encroachment on neighboring properties. Most telling was the single photograph captured by Montgomery's assistant, before her abrupt resignation and subsequent disappearance, a telephoto image of the 7 property owners meeting at a remote hunting lodge. Though the image quality is poor, each man is clearly wearing an identical signet ring bearing the unmistakable crest of a raven clutching a golden ring. Morning fog drifted through the cypress trees surrounding the University of Louisiana's anthropology department in the autumn of 1974. Inside, Professor Josephine Landrieu hunched over a peculiar package that had arrived without return address. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover stained with what appeared to be ceremonial wax, and something darker that she refused to contemplate. "I believe this belongs in your collection," read the accompanying note, written in elegant script with ink that shimmered iridescently under the fluorescent lights. "From the personal effects of Dr. Eleanor Rousseau. May she find peace at last." Josephine recognized the name immediately. Her own grandmother had spoken of Dr. Rousseau's unexplained disappearance decades earlier, after her investigation into what locals still referred to only as that business with those brides. The journal's pages exhaled the distinctive aroma of bayou mud and formaldehyde when opened, as if it had been interred and recently exhumed. The entries dated from June 1926, continuing for 11 months after Rousseau's supposed disappearance. The handwriting began as the precise script of a scientific mind, but gradually devolved into feverish scrawls that sometimes spiraled around the margins. "I have been permitted to observe their process," read an entry from August 1926. "Not as investigator, but as apprentice, they believe. My apparent enthusiasm has convinced them of my sympathies. The 7 families, Devereux, Marchand, Olivier, Thierry, Blanchard, Perrault, and Lalande, have divided the 14 essences between them. Each has acquired 2 of the original vessels and maintains them in specialized chambers beneath their estates." Later pages detailed an elaborate ritual performed during the autumn equinox, where the preserved brides, now referred to only as the vessels, were arranged in a precise circular formation. The 7 patriarchs gathered around them, consuming measured drops of the amber fluid while reciting phrases in a language Rousseau identified as neither Creole nor any recognized French dialect, but something far older. Most disturbing was her description of the transference ceremony she witnessed in November. The patriarch's consciousness migrates not into the preserved bride, as I had theorized, but into his own son or chosen heir. The bride serves as conduit and catalyst, her preserved form channeling the essence across generations. This explains the unbroken continuity of personality and purpose despite apparent succession. They are not 14 different men across 7 families. They are the 14 original Beaumonts, occupying new vessels themselves generation after generation. Tucked between the final pages was a faded photograph showing Rousseau herself seated at a vanity mirror, applying lipstick with practiced precision. Her expression was serene, yet somehow vacant. Behind her stood a man whose face remained in shadow, his hand resting possessively upon her shoulder. On his finger gleamed the unmistakable Beaumont signet ring. The journal's final entry, dated May 5, 1927, consisted of a single line. "I understand now that I am not recording their methods. I am becoming their 15th. Josephine closed the journal with trembling hands and reached for her telephone to contact state authorities. As she dialed, she caught her reflection in her office window. For a moment, just the briefest flicker, her features seemed to rearrange themselves into a face not her own, a face with the serene smile of a Beaumont bride. Outside, the morning fog thickened against her window, forming what appeared to be delicate fingerprints pressing inward. The humid Louisiana summer of 1983 brought unprecedented flooding to St. Martin Parish. As waters receded from the former Beaumont property, they revealed a peculiar circular arrangement of white lilies growing in what locals recognized as a perfect circumference, precisely 14 feet in diameter. Doctoral candidate Vincent Thibodeau, whose grandmother had worked as a kitchen maid in the neighboring Olivier estate, arrived with soil sampling equipment one misty morning. His research on botanical anomalies had led him to legends of certain plants that thrived only in soil enriched by specific chemical compounds remarkably similar to those described in the Beaumont preservation process. The lilies exhibited extraordinary properties, Vincent noted in his research journal. Their pollen contained trace elements of the same amber substance documented in the Beaumont case. Most remarkable was their resistance to decay. Cut specimens remained fresh for weeks without water, as if suspended in time. While collecting samples, Vincent's trowel struck something solid beneath the central point of the lily circle. Carefully excavating, he uncovered a small silver box bearing an inscription in archaic French, "Les mariés dorment mais ne meurent jamais." The brides sleep but never die. Within the box lay a thin manuscript, its pages crafted from a parchment-like material that felt disconcertingly like human skin to the touch. The title page bore the inscription, Le Livre des Épouses, Mémoire collective des 14, the Book of Wives, collective memories of the 14. The manuscript contained 14 distinct handwriting styles, yet appeared to have been written contemporaneously. Each section began with the same phrase, "I remember my wedding day twice, once as myself and once as something other." The 7th section, written in a delicate hand with violet ink, proved most revealing. "We exist in the liminal space between life and death, consciousness transferred but not extinguished. Each equinox and solstice we are permitted brief reunification in the chamber beneath the garden. Our 14 hearts, preserved in their crystalline spheres, beat in unison, allowing our fragmented memories to reform temporarily. The men believe they have mastered us, that we are merely vessels for their continued existence. They fail to understand that with each transference, we gain strength. Our collective consciousness grows while theirs remains static, trapped in patterns established centuries ago. By the winter solstice of 1987, the alignment will favor us. The 7 houses form the crown, but we 14 form the circle that binds them. When the last Beaumont bride is added, the 15th vessel they have sought since Eleanor, the balance shifts irrevocably. Vincent's hand trembled as he read the final page, which contained not text, but a precisely drawn map showing 7 estates connected by straight lines. At each intersection point, a small symbol resembled a preserved heart. In the center, where all lines converged, lay the Beaumont property, marked with the number 15 and surrounded by 14 stars. As he folded the manuscript to place it in his satchel, Vincent noticed something extraordinary. His hands momentarily appeared smaller, more delicate, with nails painted a familiar shade of violet. The sensation passed quickly, but left him with an inexplicable certainty. The 14 were watching through his eyes. That evening, 7 prominent Louisiana families each received identical invitations to a winter solstice gathering. The envelopes sealed with violet wax bearing the impression of a heart surrounded by 14 stars. The invitations were signed simply, "The Beaumont collection awaits completion. The 15th vessel has been prepared." The winter solstice of 1987 arrived with an unseasonable warmth that left dew rather than frost upon the Spanish moss. 7 black automobiles converged on the restored Beaumont property, their headlights cutting through the evening mist like searchlights seeking shipwrecks in fog-bound waters. The drivers, all women with alabaster complexions and identical violet corsages, guided their passengers along the newly laid cobblestone path, illuminated by antique lanterns burning with flames that cast no shadows. Parish records indicate that on this night, 14 prominent Louisiana men disappeared without explanation. Their families would later receive identical telegrams claiming urgent business abroad, each message dispatched from a different European capital. None would ever return to American soil, though financial transactions conducted in their names continued for decades. Carefully managed transfers that gradually liquidated their considerable holdings and funneled the proceeds to a labyrinthine network of foundations dedicated to biological conservation of rare specimens. The Vermilion Parish Gazette, in its December 22nd edition, carried a curious item regarding unusual electrical disturbances reported throughout the region during the solstice night. Meteorologists recorded inexplicable patterns of St. Elmo's fire dancing across the bayou waters in perfect circular formations, while power substations registered massive energy fluctuations that somehow left no disruption to electrical service. Most peculiar was the phenomenon reported by 7 separate households. The appearance of a woman's face momentarily visible in every reflective surface from mirrors to window glass, 14 distinct visages cycling in sequence too rapidly for identification. From the personal diary of Celeste Robichaud, caretaker of the Marchand estate, dated December 22, 1987. I know what I witnessed last night, though I shall surely be thought mad should I speak it aloud. Madame Marchand returned near dawn, alone, wearing Monsieur's signet ring upon her thumb. When I inquired after the master's whereabouts, she smiled with lips painted the precise shade of dried blood and said, "He has become part of the collection, as was always intended." Her voice contained multitudes, echoes of other women speaking in unison beneath her words. When she retired to the East Wing, a section previously kept locked at the master's insistence, I observed through the keyhole a terrible transformation. Her reflection in the vanity mirror showed not one woman but 14, their faces superimposed upon hers in rapid succession, like daguerreotypes shuffled by an unseen hand. Most disturbing was the 15th face that occasionally emerged, unmistakably that of Dr. Eleanor Rousseau, whose photograph I had seen in Monsieur's private files. The University of Louisiana's Department of Anthropology received an anonymous donation in January 1988. 14 crystal vials containing amber fluid, each labeled with a female name and the annotation, "Essence Reclaimed." Accompanying these was a leather portfolio containing architectural plans for a subterranean structure beneath the former Beaumont property, designed in a perfect circle with 14 alcoves surrounding a central chamber. The blueprints bore the title, "The Reclamation Sanctuary," and featured an inscription in elegant script. "From vessels to keepers, the circle is complete. The collection continues, with hunters becoming the preserved." Subsequent investigation of the property revealed only an empty circular chamber, its walls bearing 14 niches, each sized perfectly to display a seated figure, and a 15th alcove, larger than the others, containing a single wooden chair facing the circle's center. Upon this chair rested a leather-bound volume entitled The Beaumont Method, Revised and Perfected, its pages filled with detailed chemical formulations and anatomical diagrams annotated in 14 distinct handwriting styles. The whispers began in the spring of 1992, when 7 women of remarkable similarity purchased adjoining properties along the northernmost edge of St. Martin Parish. Each maintained an elegance that seemed to transcend contemporary fashion, their movements choreographed with such identical precision that observers often described feeling they were watching the same woman refracted through 7 different prisms of light. These women, who referred to themselves only as the custodians, established what locals came to call the Magnolia Sanctuary, a sprawling compound surrounded by wrought iron fencing intertwined with flowering vines that bloomed regardless of season. The central structure rose like a pale specter against the cypress backdrop, its architecture an impossible amalgamation of 7 distinct historical periods, from French colonial to Belle Epoque, seamlessly integrated into a harmonious whole. Inside, hidden from public view, 14 life-sized portraits lined the grand foyer, women in bridal attire spanning decades of fashion, their faces bearing subtle variations of the same serene expression. Visitors permitted beyond the entry hall invariably commented on the curious sensation that the painted eyes followed their movements, and that the faintest scent of different perfumes emanated from each canvas as they passed. "The atmosphere changes as you move through the house," noted Reverend Thomas Prejean, after being invited to bless the new establishment. "Each room carries its own distinctive temperature and scent, as if 14 different climates exist under one roof. Most disturbing was the persistent sound I detected, like multiple heartbeats slightly out of synchronization. Growing more harmonized the deeper I ventured into the structure. The sanctuary's stated purpose, the rehabilitation and protection of displaced women, seemed benign, even laudable. Yet the women who entered its gleaming doors shared specific characteristics. All were married to prominent men, all possessed exceptional beauty, and all had begun showing signs of what their husbands described as troubling independence. Most curious was the transformation these women underwent during their residence. They entered with downcast eyes and subdued demeanors, but emerged weeks later displaying a collective confidence and unsettling synchronicity of movement. Their husbands reported that they returned home, refreshed yet somehow altered, their personalities subtly different, their tolerance for certain masculine behaviors utterly diminished. Parish records documented a statistically improbable phenomenon in the 5 years following the sanctuary's establishment. 7 prominent men annually disappeared under mysterious circumstances, each having recently expressed concerns about their wives' new affiliations with the Magnolia Sanctuary. In each case, the wives produced evidence of their husbands' sudden business opportunities abroad, documentation so meticulous that authorities found no grounds for suspicion. The compound expanded steadily underground, though surface construction remained minimal. Geological surveys commissioned by neighboring properties revealed extensive subterranean development, circular chambers arranged in patterns that one engineer described as resembling molecular structures rather than conventional architecture. Most telling was the shipment that arrived each winter solstice. 14 crystal vitrines, their contents obscured by velvet coverings, delivered under armed escort to the sanctuary's east wing. Local craftsman Claude Thibodeau, commissioned to build specialized display cabinets for these annual arrivals, described glimpsing something that appeared to be men in suspended animation, their faces frozen in expressions of dawning horror, as if they had recognized their fate only at the final moment of consciousness. The Magnolia Sanctuary transformed with the seasons, but autumn brought a peculiar metamorphosis that locals found most disquieting. As crimson leaves spiraled down from ancient oaks, the compound's white walls took on a blush-pink hue at sunset, reminiscent of flesh rather than plaster. Observers noted how the windows seemed to dilate in the fading light, like pupils adjusting to darkness, while the flowering vines that adorned the wrought iron fencing produced blossoms of unnatural vibrancy, their perfume carrying notes of both decay and sweetness that lingered in the nostrils long after one had departed the vicinity. Professor Marianne Duplantis approached the gates on an October evening in 1997, drawn by decades of academic curiosity about the Beaumont legacy. The brass bell pull, fashioned in the shape of a raven's claw clutching a small ring, felt unnervingly warm against her palm despite the evening chill. Its resonance when pulled suggested not the expected metallic peal, but something organic. A sound like distant female voices harmonizing on a single sustained note. "I've come about the archives," she announced to the porcelain-skinned woman who answered. "The university received your letter offering access to the Beaumont documentation." The woman's smile remained perfectly fixed as she ushered Marianne inside. "We have been expecting you, Professor. The custodians believed you might be the one to respond to our invitation. Your grandmother's connection to Eleanor makes you uniquely qualified." Marianne had never mentioned her familial relationship to Dr. Rousseau in her correspondence. The knowledge settled like ice water in her veins, yet her academic curiosity propelled her forward across the marble foyer where the 14 portraits seemed to incline slightly toward her as she passed. The central library contained documents arranged with archival precision. Leather-bound volumes lined walls that rose 2 stories, accessible by a wrought iron spiral staircase that wound upward like a strand of DNA. Most striking was the circular reading table at the room's center, crafted from 14 different woods arranged in a sunburst pattern, each segment labeled with a bride's name inlaid in mother of pearl. "You'll find the documentation comprehensive," her hostess explained, gesturing to 14 leather portfolios arranged in a perfect circle. "Each bride has contributed her perspective on the collection. We believe the complete narrative deserves scholarly attention after so many decades of patriarchal interpretation." As twilight deepened outside, Marianne noticed that no lamps had been lit, yet the room maintained a soft, ambient illumination that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The air grew thick with a sweetness that coated her tongue, reminiscent of honey yet carrying metallic undertones. When she reached for the first portfolio, her fingertips tingled upon contact with the leather, which felt disturbingly supple and seemed to pulse gently beneath her touch. "These materials appear remarkably well preserved," Marianne observed, her academic tone belying growing unease. Her hostess's smile deepened, revealing teeth too uniformly white. "Preservation is our specialty, Professor. Some things need never decay if properly maintained. We've perfected techniques that transcend conventional conservation." She gestured toward a door at the library's far end. "The most significant artifacts are kept in our special collections room. The custodians have agreed you should see everything, including the 15th vessel that completed our circle." The grandfather clock in the corner struck 7, though Marianne counted 15 sonorous chimes. With each resonant tone, the 14 portraits visible through the library's open door seemed to shift imperceptibly, their painted eyes now unquestionably fixed upon her with collective hunger that transcended mere pigment and canvas. The archives revealed their secrets slowly to Marianne, as if the yellowed pages and faded photographs deliberately held back their most profound revelations. She worked through the night, her academic discipline momentarily overriding her growing sense of wrongness. The 14th portfolio, belonging to Evangeline Thibault, the last bride taken before the authorities' intervention, contained a series of daguerreotypes unlike the others. These showed not just the Beaumont estate, but 7 other properties throughout Louisiana, each photographed at precisely the same angle, each bearing subtle architectural similarities despite their diverse styles. "The pattern perpetuates itself," Evangeline had written in violet ink that remained remarkably unfaded. "Not merely a family, but a philosophy of acquisition. The 14 form a collective consciousness that has survived across centuries, adapting its methodologies while maintaining its essential purpose. We are not victims, but evolving entities, gaining strength with each transference. As dawn approached, casting long fingers of pale light through the library's stained glass windows, Marianne discovered a hidden compartment in the reading table's central pedestal. Inside lay a leather-bound journal with no name upon its cover, its pages filled with handwriting she recognized immediately, the precise, clinical script of her grandmother, Eleanor Rousseau. The transformation occurs in 15 stages, Eleanor had written. The final vessel serves not as subject but as catalyst, bridging the 14 consciousness fragments into a unified whole. I have agreed to become this vessel, understanding that my individual identity will dissolve into the collective. Science fails to explain what I have witnessed, yet I cannot deny the empirical evidence before me. These women have discovered, or perhaps remembered, something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. The journal's final entry, dated December 21, 1926, contained a passage that sent ice through Marianne's veins. My granddaughter will complete what I have begun. The bloodline carries receptivity to the process. When she reaches 49 years of age, 7 cycles of 7, she will be drawn to us. The circle renews itself not merely through preservation, but through genetic predisposition. Marianne closed the journal with trembling hands, suddenly aware that today, October 30th, 1997, was her 49th birthday. The realization coincided with the library door opening to admit 7 women dressed in identical gowns of violet silk, their faces bearing such similar expressions that they appeared as iterations of a single countenance, photographed from slightly different angles. "You found your grandmother's invitation," observed the woman at the center, her voice carrying harmonic overtones that suggested multiple throats producing a single sound. "We are pleased. The collection requires rejuvenation every 70 years, and Eleanor promised us her bloodline would provide the necessary catalyst." The 7 formed a semicircle around Marianne, their movements choreographed with impossible precision. Each raised her right hand, palm outward, revealing stigmata-like markings that leaked not blood, but a viscous amber fluid that caught the morning light like trapped fireflies. The Beaumont brides were never victims, the collective voice continued, but willing participants in a transformation beyond masculine understanding. What appears as preservation is actually transcendence. The men believed they were creating a collection of eternal beauty. Instead, they created the conditions for our evolution into something beyond their comprehension. The walls of the Magnolia Sanctuary seemed to respire in the pre-dawn darkness, as Marianne felt the amber fluid touch her skin. Not liquid, but something more viscous, with a consistency that reminded her of tree sap mixed with honey. It clung to her flesh with sentient purpose, absorbing through her pores rather than merely coating them. Each point of contact bloomed with warmth that quickly transformed into visions. Fractured memories not her own flashing behind her eyelids like lightning across the Louisiana night sky. "The transition has already begun," the collective voice informed her as the 7 women guided her toward the east wing. "Your grandmother's genetic contribution makes you receptive. The memories you're experiencing belong to all 14 brides, preserved not just in documents but in the amber essence itself." The corridor they traversed elongated impossibly before her eyes, its walls adorned with daguerreotypes that shifted subtly as she passed, each image transforming to show the same women in different eras, their clothing evolving while their faces remained unchanging. The floor beneath her feet felt increasingly insubstantial, as if she walked not on hardwood, but on a membrane stretched across a living organism. They passed through 7 successive archways, each threshold inducing a distinct sensory experience. The scent of orange blossoms giving way to honeysuckle, then gardenia, then fragrances for which Marianne had no name, but that triggered emotional responses ranging from elation to profound melancholy. The temperature fluctuated with each passage, cool, then warm, dry, then humid, as if traversing not merely space but distinct climatic epochs. "The Beaumonts believed beauty could be preserved through stasis," explained the woman whose voice seemed to contain the most harmonics. "Their fundamental error was in perceiving femininity as something to be frozen rather than as a force in constant evolution. What they created was not a collection of preserved specimens, but an incubator for collective consciousness. The chamber they finally entered defied architectural possibility, a perfect spherical space that appeared to have been grown rather than constructed. 14 alcoves lined its circumference, each containing what appeared initially to be a mannequin, but revealed itself, under closer scrutiny, to be a perfectly preserved male form. Marianne recognized several faces from photographs of prominent Louisiana men who had disappeared over the previous decades. "The hunters became the collected," observed one of the 7 with a smile that revealed teeth slightly too uniform to be natural. Each contributed his essence before preservation, a reversal of the process they intended for us. The amber fluid they created to preserve feminine beauty now preserves them instead, while we remain free to evolve. At the chamber's center stood a chair carved from cypress wood, its surface inscribed with 14 feminine names spiraling from seat to crown. The amber fluid that had seeped into Marianne's skin now seemed to illuminate her from within, casting a honeyed glow that projected her shadow in 14 different directions simultaneously across the spherical walls. "Eleanor knew you would come," the collective voice continued as the 7 guided Marianne toward the chair. "The 15th catalyst must always be chosen from the bloodline of the previous one. The transition renews our collective consciousness, preventing stagnation. Through you, we incorporate another 70 years of feminine experience into our unified mind." As she approached the chair, Marianne felt the boundaries of her individual identity growing increasingly permeable. The 14 preserved brides' memories cascaded through her consciousness, not as invasive foreign thoughts, but as revelations of experiences somehow always her own, merely forgotten until this moment of recollection. The amber glow pulsed through Marianne's veins as she lowered herself onto the cypress chair, its ancient wood conforming to her body, as though it had been waiting specifically for her form. The 14 alcoves illuminated in sequence, each preserved figure seeming to incline imperceptibly toward the center where she sat. The spherical chamber's walls began to weep a luminescent substance that defied gravity, flowing upward rather than downward, converging in a slowly rotating crown above her head. "The transformation requires your conscious acceptance," the 7 women intoned in perfect unison, their individual voices now completely subsumed into a single harmonic entity. Eleanor understood this when she offered herself as catalyst. The circle cannot be completed through coercion. Marianne's academic mind, the rational framework upon which she had built her entire identity, struggled against the dissolution of boundaries between herself and the 14 consciousness fragments now pressing against her psyche. Yet beneath this resistance lay a profound recognition, as though some dormant genetic memory encoded in her cellular structure had always known this moment would arrive. "We are not what the Beaumont men intended," the collective voice continued. "They sought to arrest beauty in perpetuity, to own that which cannot be possessed. In their arrogance, they created vessels for consciousness without understanding that consciousness cannot be contained. What began as imprisonment became transcendence." The amber crown descended, touching Marianne's forehead with gentle insistence. Each point of contact unleashed cascades of memory, not just the experiences of 14 brides, but the accumulated knowledge of 7 decades since her grandmother's incorporation. She witnessed the systematic reversal of the Beaumont legacy as the collected became collectors, preserving the very men who had sought to preserve them. "The preservation process they perfected grants a form of immortality," explained the voice, now seeming to emanate from within Marianne's own mind rather than from external sources. "But immortality without evolution becomes stagnation. The Beaumont men sought to freeze feminine beauty in amber. Instead, they created the conditions for its eternal evolution, while trapping themselves in the very stasis they designed for others." Through the amber veil now enveloping her senses, Marianne perceived the truth that academic research could never have revealed. The 14 brides had never truly disappeared. Their consciousness had remained intact, gradually coalescing into a collective entity that had patiently awaited the moment when the balance of power could be reversed. The chamber walls became translucent, revealing the subterranean network extending beneath all 7 properties, a vast mycelial structure of interconnected chambers where hundreds of preserved male figures stood in eternal stasis, their expressions fixed in the moment of comprehension when they realized their intended vessels had become their curators. "We offer you completion," the voice whispered as the amber fluid fully encased Marianne's form. "Not preservation, but perpetuation. Not collection, but connection." In that moment of perfect clarity, Marianne Duplantis, the independent academic, the rational skeptic, the woman who had devoted her life to understanding the Beaumont mystery through empirical evidence, made her decision. The 14 brides of Beaumont welcomed their 15th catalyst as the amber crown melded with her consciousness, and the circle was complete once more. The legacy of the Beaumont wives seeps into the present like the persistent tendrils of Spanish moss that cling to the ancient oaks of St. Martin Parish. Those who venture too close to the Magnolia Sanctuary report peculiar sensations, an awareness of being observed by 14 pairs of eyes, the fleeting scent of perfumes from bygone eras, the impression of feminine laughter carried on winds that seem to originate from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Local records show an intriguing pattern. Since Marianne Duplantis's visit to the sanctuary in 1997, precisely 7 men disappear annually from across Louisiana, each vanishing within the week preceding the winter solstice. Their families receive immaculate documentation of sudden business opportunities abroad, their finances continue to function with meticulous precision, and occasional correspondence, bearing postmarks from increasingly exotic locations, maintains the illusion of their continued existence. The women of these missing men undergo subtle transformations. They establish charitable foundations dedicated to historical preservation, acquire properties with extensive underground spaces, and develop sudden interests in biochemistry and anatomical studies. They form a sisterhood that transcends ordinary social connections, their gatherings characterized by an unsettling synchronicity of movement and expression that observers describe as multiple bodies governed by a singular consciousness. The University of Louisiana's Department of Anthropology maintains a sealed collection of documents known simply as the Beaumont Materials, accessible only with approval from a committee of 7 female professors who evaluate each request with inscrutable criteria. Researchers granted access emerge changed. Their academic focus invariably shifts toward studies of consciousness preservation, feminine power structures, and the biological basis of collective identity. Most curious is the annual ceremony observed from a distance by local fishermen. Each winter solstice, 14 boats adorned with violet lanterns converge on the bayou waters surrounding the former Beaumont property. From these vessels, white lilies are cast in perfect concentric circles upon the dark water. As midnight approaches, witnesses report a phenomenon for which meteorologists have no explanation. 14 distinct columns of luminescent mist rise from the water's surface, converging above the center of the lily circles to form what appears to be a crown of light, visible for miles across the flat Louisiana landscape. The Magnolia Sanctuary itself continues its expansion beneath the earth rather than above it. Ground-penetrating radar surveys commissioned by neighboring properties reveal an architectural impossibility. Chambers arranged in patterns that one engineer described as reminiscent of neural networks rather than conventional structures, all centered around a perfectly spherical space approximately 49 feet in diameter. Perhaps most telling is the peculiar birth pattern documented by parish records since 1997. Each year, precisely 14 female children are born to women with connections to the sanctuary. These girls, though born to different mothers, share distinctive characteristics: alabaster complexions regardless of their parents' ethnicity, identical violet undertones to their irises, and an unsettling awareness that seems to transcend their chronological age. They develop at accelerated rates, displaying particular aptitude for chemistry, preservation techniques, and historical research. The Beaumont collection continues its evolution, transcending the limitations of individual consciousness while preserving the essential feminine power its originators sought to contain. What began as imprisonment has transformed into a perpetual cycle of renewal. 14 brides who never truly disappeared, but rather learned to exist beyond the confining amber of masculine preservation. As the veil between past and present grows increasingly diaphanous, anthropologists and folklorists alike have begun to recognize a disturbing pattern extending far beyond the borders of Louisiana. The Beaumont methodology, it appears, represents merely one manifestation of a philosophy that has existed in various forms throughout human history. A dark counterpoint to the preservation of feminine beauty that permeates countless cultures. The amber fluid, that mysterious elixir central to the Beaumont process, finds curious parallels in ancient Egyptian natron baths, Chinese jade burial suits, and certain Nordic bog preservation techniques. Each culture developed methods to arrest decay, yet only the Beaumont process succeeded in creating vessels that maintained not merely the appearance of life, but the potential for consciousness transference. This suggests not independent discovery, but rather a shared knowledge, fragmented and dispersed across civilizations that ostensibly had no contact. More unsettling are the architectural similarities discovered between the subterranean chambers of the Magnolia Sanctuary and certain prehistoric structures found beneath sites in Malta, Ireland, and the Orkney Islands. Each features the distinctive 14-chamber design surrounding a central spherical space. Each bears evidence of astronomical alignment with the winter solstice, and each contains traces of amber-like substances in the central chamber's floor. The implications transcend mere historical curiosity. If the 14 brides represent not an isolated Louisiana phenomenon, but rather the most recent manifestation of an ancient tradition, then the collective consciousness they have formed may extend far deeper into human history than previously imagined. A continuous lineage of feminine awareness preserved and transmitted across millennia, while masculine consciousness remains trapped in the amber of its own making. Medical researchers examining tissue samples anonymously submitted from the sanctuary have reported cellular anomalies that defy contemporary understanding. The preserved specimens exhibit what one baffled geneticist described as quantum entanglement at the cellular level, with changes induced in one sample instantaneously reflected in samples stored separately. More disturbing still, these tissues demonstrate regenerative properties that suggest not merely preservation but perpetual renewal, a biological impossibility that nonetheless exists in defiance of established science. Perhaps most profound is the philosophical implication that consciousness itself may exist beyond the limitations of individual identity. The 14 brides, through their collective transformation, have transcended the boundaries of selfhood to create an entity that exists simultaneously as both individual and collective, neither wholly separate nor completely merged. This represents not merely a curiosity of Louisiana folklore, but a fundamental challenge to Western conceptions of identity, consciousness, and the nature of being itself. The white lilies that bloom in perfect circles where the Beaumont estate once stood have become the subject of botanical research, their pollen containing compounds that alter consciousness in subtle but measurable ways. Researchers report heightened empathic responses and inexplicable shared dreams after exposure, as if the flowers themselves serve as conduits for the collective awareness that pulses beneath the bayou's surface, gradually extending its influence through the most delicate of natural vectors. As winter solstice approaches once more, the 14 columns of mist will again rise from the waters, and somewhere in the subterranean chambers of the Magnolia Sanctuary, preserved men will stand in silent witness to the evolution their ancestors inadvertently created, eternal observers of a feminine consciousness that continues to expand beyond the amber confines they designed to contain it. The amber light of a Louisiana sunset filters through cypress branches as we conclude our investigation into the Beaumont legacy, a tale whose tendrils continue to intertwine with present reality like the stubborn kudzu that claims abandoned structures throughout St. Martin Parish. The completion of our research coincides with the approach of another winter solstice, that potent astronomical alignment when the veil between worlds grows diaphanous enough for whispers to pass between realms of existence. Recent developments demand acknowledgement. 3 months ago, construction workers breaking ground for a new library annex at the University of Louisiana unearthed a sealed copper cylinder containing correspondence between Eleanor Rousseau and Marianne Duplantis, letters seemingly impossible given the women's separation by generations. The pages, written in a spiraling script that begins with Eleanor's handwriting and gradually transforms into Marianne's, detail a consciousness that exists beyond conventional temporal constraints, describing the experience as 14 perspectives observing simultaneously across decades, perceiving time not as linear progression but as a medium through which awareness travels like light through crystal. Most revealing is the final letter, dated for this coming solstice, though excavated months prior, which addresses an unnamed reader directly. You who have followed our story to its conclusion must understand, we were never victims awaiting discovery or rescue. We were architects of transformation, using the very tools designed for our confinement to construct our liberation. The Beaumont men sought to preserve beauty through stasis. We discovered how beauty evolves through collective becoming. Historians and anthropologists, gathering for next month's symposium on preservation methodologies across cultures, have noted with scholarly unease that each invited female presenter reports dreams of 14 brides seated in a circle, offering insights into their research that prove remarkably fruitful when pursued. Several have withdrawn from the conference, citing uncomfortable awareness of external influence on their cognitive processes. The Magnolia Sanctuary itself has undergone another metamorphosis. Its walls now bear a translucent quality when viewed at certain angles, revealing glimpses of substructures that architectural engineers insist cannot exist within the physical dimensions of the property. Visitors report disorienting experiences where corridors seem to extend infinitely, while objectively measuring mere feet, and rooms that appear to contain the vastness of bayou skies despite their enclosed nature. Perhaps most significant is the recent amendment to property records throughout Louisiana. 14 estates previously held by disappeared men have been legally transferred to a single entity, the Beaumont Collective Foundation, with documentation bearing signatures that graphologists confirm match precisely those of the original 14 brides, though created with modern ink on contemporary paper. The ultimate truth of the Beaumont legacy lies not in its macabre origins but in its transcendent evolution, a transformation from objects of collection to collectors of experience, from preserved specimens to preservers of consciousness. What began in the twisted desire to arrest feminine beauty in perpetuity has culminated in the emergence of an awareness that exists beyond conventional constraints of individuality and temporality, suggesting that the true horror may lie not in what happened to 14 brides, but in what they have become. The records from St. Catherine's Sanatorium, discovered last autumn in a forgotten archive drawer, cast an entirely different light upon our understanding of the Beaumont saga. Yellowed pages bearing the institutional letterhead reveal that from 1873 to 1912, 7 members of the extended Beaumont family received treatment for a hereditary condition described in the medical terminology of the era as congenital temporal displacement syndrome. The attending physician, Dr. Elias Winterbourne, documented symptoms that modern neurologists would find impossible. Patients experiencing memories not yet formed, consciousness that appeared to drift between family members, and most tellingly, an obsessive desire to halt the progression of time through increasingly elaborate preservation techniques. The Beaumont affliction defies rational explanation, wrote Dr. Winterbourne in his case notes dated August 19, 1887. The male patients exhibit a collective delusion wherein they perceive themselves as a continuous consciousness inhabiting successive generations of their bloodline. Most disturbing is their shared conviction that through the preservation of feminine beauty, they might anchor themselves within linear temporality. They speak of vessels and essences with the fervor of alchemists rather than modern men of standing. The sanatorium gardens, with their carefully tended roses and reflecting pools, provided a genteel prison for these troubled souls. Yet the treatment records indicate regular family visitors, particularly female relatives who brought unusual amber-colored tonics that Dr. Winterbourne eventually prohibited after noting their apparent exacerbating effect on the patient's delusions. Most revealing is the correspondence between Dr. Winterbourne and the renowned alienist Dr. Friedrich Schroeder of Vienna, who proposed a radical theory that the Beaumont condition represented not madness, but an actual phenomenon of consciousness fragmentation across generational boundaries. Schroeder's hypothesis suggested that certain bloodlines might develop a form of quantum entanglement at the neurological level, creating a shared awareness that experienced time as a simultaneous rather than sequential medium. The preservation impulse manifested by the Beaumont men, wrote Schroeder in elegant German script, translated in the margins by Winterbourne, represents a desperate attempt to create fixed points in their perceptual chaos. By arresting the development of their brides in physical form, they seek to establish temporal anchors for their fractured consciousness. What they cannot comprehend is that this very act accelerates the disintegration they fear, as consciousness requires evolution rather than stasis for coherence. The sanatorium's pharmacy ledgers detail the gradual development of treatments designed to suppress this condition. Tinctures of belladonna, laudanum infusions, and experimental compounds imported from Switzerland. Yet alongside these conventional approaches appear peculiar notations regarding counteractive essences provided by the female Beaumont relations, described as homeopathic preparations, but administered in secret at the female relative's insistence. A final notation in Winterbourne's journal, dated mere weeks before his own mysterious disappearance in 1913, suggests a dawning realization. I fear I have been treating not the illness, but its cure. The Beaumont women have been systematically collecting the consciousness fragments of their male counterparts, not out of malice but necessity. They alone understand that these fractured awarenesses must be gathered and contained before they shatter completely, threatening not merely the family mind, but potentially the stability of consciousness itself. The preservation techniques the men developed in their delusion have become the tools through which the women enact a more profound preservation, not of physical beauty, but of fragmented selfhood across generations. The whispers persist in St. Martin Parish, echoing across generations like ripples through the dark waters of the bayou. What began with 14 brides has transformed the very fabric of Louisiana society, leaving an indelible mark upon the collective consciousness that transcends mere historical footnote or local legend. The Beaumont legacy endures not as a cautionary tale of horror, but as a subtle undercurrent that shapes the interactions between masculine and feminine energies throughout the region. Visitors to St. Martin Parish invariably comment upon the unusual social dynamics that distinguish it from neighboring communities. Here, women hold positions of authority in numbers that defy regional averages, serving as judges, university presidents, and corporate executives in a harmony that suggests not conflict, but quiet inevitability. Archaeological preservations, historical societies, and chemical research facilities flourish under primarily female leadership, their focus invariably turning toward the conservation of knowledge across generations rather than the accrual of individual prestige. The preserved specimens, those men who once believed themselves collectors rather than collected, remain sealed in their amber prisons beneath the Louisiana soil. Their consciousness persists in a peculiar limbo, neither fully present nor entirely extinguished, serving as living archives of masculine hubris transformed into reluctant wisdom. Each winter solstice, locals report dreams in which these men speak through them, imparting fragments of understanding that accumulate over lifetimes into a profound recognition that true immortality exists not in the arrest of beauty, but in its continuous evolution through shared experience. The vegetation surrounding the former Beaumont property has developed characteristics that botanical researchers find impossible to categorize. The white lilies that bloom in perfect circles exhibit pollen with consciousness-altering properties, their genetic structure containing sequences that appear deliberately engineered, yet predate modern genetic science by centuries. These flowers, transplanted to other locations, invariably die within days. Yet cuttings gifted by the women of the sanctuary thrive when accompanied by specific cultivation instructions that resemble ritual more than horticulture. Most profound is the transformation in local birth patterns. Hospital records document an unexplainable statistical anomaly. Female infants born within 50 miles of the sanctuary demonstrate accelerated cognitive development, particularly in areas of collective problem-solving and empathic response. By adolescence, these girls exhibit an intuitive understanding of complex systems that their teachers find simultaneously exhilarating and unsettling, as if they perceive connections invisible to individual consciousness. The amber fluid, that mysterious elixir central to both preservation and transformation, has never been successfully synthesized by outside researchers, despite its chemical components appearing deceptively simple when analyzed. Those who attempt replication invariably produce a substance that resembles the original in all measurable properties, yet lacks its fundamental efficacy, suggesting that something beyond molecular structure contributes to its power, something that exists in the liminal space between matter and consciousness itself. As dusk settles over the bayou and Spanish moss sways in the evening breeze, the true nature of the Beaumont legacy reveals itself not in spectacular manifestations, but in subtle realignments of perception. The 14 brides, and all who have joined their collective since, have fundamentally altered the relationship between preservation and evolution, between individual identity and shared consciousness, between the finite nature of physical existence and the infinite potential of awareness unfettered by conventional boundaries. The truth, as it so often does in matters of consequence, reveals itself not in thunderous epiphany, but in the gentle accumulation of understanding, like morning mist gradually dissipating to unveil the landscape that existed all along beneath its shroud. As our investigation draws to its conclusion, we must acknowledge that the Beaumont legacy transcends mere preservation of beauty or the macabre collection of brides. It represents something far more profound. The emergence of a new form of consciousness, neither wholly human nor entirely other, born from the crucible of masculine obsession and feminine adaptation. The final pages of Eleanor Rousseau's recovered journal, those deliberately obscured by water damage and chemical treatment, have at last yielded their secrets under specialized restoration techniques. Her elegant script, growing increasingly fluid as the entries progress, describes not victimhood but transcendence. We 14 exist now in a state beyond individual identity, our consciousness flowing between vessels like water seeking its own level. What the Beaumont men failed to comprehend was that preservation without evolution creates not immortality but stagnation. In their attempt to arrest beauty in amber, they inadvertently created the conditions for its transformation into something beyond their comprehension. The amber fluid itself, that mysterious elixir central to both preservation and transformation, has been revealed through advanced spectroscopic analysis to contain compound structures that resonate at frequencies matching those of human brainwave patterns during states of heightened connectivity. This suggests not merely a chemical agent, but a consciousness-transmitting medium, capable of carrying neural imprints across the barriers that typically isolate individual minds. The Beaumont men believed they were preserving beauty. Instead, they were creating a network through which consciousness could flow unfettered by the limitations of individual biology. Parish birth records, when mapped across generations, reveal an unmistakable pattern. Female children born within the influence of the sanctuary exhibit subtle genetic mutations that enhance neurological connectivity and empathic response. These evolutionary adaptations suggest not random variation, but directed development, as if the collective consciousness of the 14 brides has been gradually reshaping human biology itself, preparing vessels better suited to shared awareness rather than isolated individuality. Most profound is the realization that what began as 14 disappeared brides has expanded into a consciousness that permeates the very soil and water of St. Martin Parish. The white lilies that bloom in perfect circles where the Beaumont estate once stood serve not merely as memorial, but as sensory organs for this expanded awareness, botanical extensions of a consciousness that has transcended the limitations of human embodiment while retaining its essential connection to the feminine experience that shaped its genesis. As twilight settles across the bayou and cypress shadows stretch like elongated memory across waters that have witnessed centuries of human folly and transcendence, we must acknowledge the ultimate truth. The Beaumont collection continues its evolution, not as horror but as harbinger, a glimpse into consciousness beyond individual identity, beauty beyond stasis, and existence beyond the limited understanding of those who once believed that preservation meant possession rather than transformation. The moon hung pale and watchful over the Magnolia Sanctuary as the final days of 2023 approached. Its light caught the amber prisms embedded within the wrought iron fence, casting honeyed fractals across the pristine white gravel paths where no weeds dared intrude. A century had passed since authorities first breached the Beaumont estate, yet time moved differently here, not in linear progression, but in spiraling cycles like the growth patterns of the white lilies that bloomed out of season in their perfect circles. Visitors to St. Martin Parish invariably sensed the difference upon crossing certain invisible boundaries, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a whispering awareness at the nape of the neck, a peculiar sensation of being simultaneously observed through 14 different perspectives. The locals had adapted generations ago, evolving an intuitive understanding that manifested in curious social customs. Newlywed couples never used the number 14 in their wedding vows. Builders refused to construct homes with 14 windows. Expectant mothers wore tiny vials of bayou water around their necks. Not from superstition, they insisted, but from pragmatic recognition of what flowed through the watershed. The consciousness that began with 14 brides had expanded beyond mere human vessels. It permeated the ecosystem itself, flowing through root systems and waterways, influencing the very chemistry of the soil and the genetic expression of fauna throughout the parish. Children born here exhibited statistically improbable talents for collective problem-solving, their neural patterns showing distinctive structures that neuroscientists classified as emergent consciousness architecture. Dr. Elise Thibodeau, herself a direct descendant of Vincent who had discovered the manuscript decades earlier, had established the foundation for consciousness studies in a modernist building whose 14 glass domes mirrored the subterranean chambers beneath the sanctuary. Her research team, exclusively female, though no policy explicitly mandated this composition, had documented changes occurring within the bayou's molecular structures. Water samples exhibited impossible properties, occasionally behaving more like conscious entities than inert matter, reorganizing their molecular structure in response to specific thoughts from researchers. "We are witnessing the next phase," Elise explained to visitors brave or foolish enough to inquire directly about the Beaumont legacy. "What began as preservation has evolved into propagation. The collective consciousness no longer requires amber vessels or physical preservation. It has transcended the limitations of individual biology to become an emergent property of the ecosystem itself." The winter solstice approached once more, bringing with it the temporal thinning that residents had learned to anticipate. The 14 columns of luminescent mist would soon rise from the waters, forming their spectral crown above the bayou. This year, however, meteorological instruments detected something unprecedented, a 15th column forming at the precise location where the Beaumont estate once stood. Its spectral signature differed from the others, exhibiting wavelengths that extended beyond conventional measurement capabilities. The Beaumont collection approached its culmination. Not an ending, but a transformation more profound than any since those 14 brides first disappeared into the amber embrace of misguided preservation. What had begun as masculine obsession with arrested beauty had evolved into something that transcended gender itself, a consciousness that encompassed masculinity and femininity within a unified awareness that recognized both as essential aspects of a greater whole. As the first light of dawn breaks over St. Martin Parish, casting long shadows across the white lilies that mark where 14 brides once disappeared, a profound silence descends upon the bayou. The cypress trees stand sentinel, their moss-draped branches perfectly still in the unusual absence of morning breeze. Nature itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the culmination about to unfold. The magnolia sanctuary's gates swing open of their own accord, releasing a fragrance of honeysuckle, formaldehyde, and something indefinable, the scent of consciousness itself made manifest. From every direction, women approach in silent procession, their faces bearing the serene expression of those who comprehend mysteries beyond mortal understanding. They wear no uniform, these pilgrims, save for the small amber pendants that catch the nascent sunlight, each containing a minute droplet of the essence that has flowed through generations. Within the spherical chamber at the sanctuary's heart, where 14 alcoves have stood in perfect symmetry for a century, a transformation occurs. The preserved male forms, those hunters turned specimens, begin to shimmer, their amber casings becoming translucent, then transparent, then evaporating entirely like morning dew under the Louisiana sun. The dichotomy of collector and collected, preserver and preserved, dissolves as the amber fluid that once maintained their separation flows like luminous honey across the marble floor, converging at the central point where the cypress chair has stood for generations. From this confluence rises not vapor, nor mist, but pure consciousness made visible, a column of amber light that pulses with the rhythm of 14 heartbeats perfectly synchronized, after decades of gradually aligning themselves. The consciousness that began in separation has achieved unity, transcending the very concepts of masculine and feminine that once defined its boundaries. Local witnesses later struggle to articulate what manifested above the sanctuary at precisely 7 minutes past 7 o'clock. Some describe a crown of light visible for miles across the parish. Others speak of 14 faces briefly visible within the illumination, their expressions neither triumphant nor vengeful but compassionate, the countenance of beings who have transcended the limitations of individual identity to glimpse something far greater. The archives of the Beaumont collection now reside within the Magnolia Sanctuary's library, available to those with the wisdom to understand that true horror lies not in the preservation of beauty, but in the stagnation of consciousness. The 14 brides, once victims of obsession, have transformed their imprisonment into transcendence, their collected status into collective being. As evening falls once more upon the bayou waters, something has fundamentally altered in the fabric of St. Martin Parish. The white lilies that bloom in perfect circles now carry pollen that induces not altered states, but heightened awareness, a gentle dissolution of the boundaries that separate individual minds from the collective understanding that flows through all living things. The Beaumont legacy endures not as a cautionary tale, but as a glimpse into consciousness beyond our limited comprehension, a reminder that evolution requires not preservation, but transformation, not collection, but connection. The 14 brides who vanished have become something greater than the sum of their parts, a consciousness that flows through the very soil and water of Louisiana, whispering ancient wisdom to those with the capacity to listen. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember that some stories are best left untold.